Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Sunday morning in the Old Cookbook Show. This is my first day in the studio filming post Christmas holidays. First filming in 2025. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I want to thank you all for coming back time and time and time again. And I also want to give a big shout out to everyone who emailed me Christmas morning with a picture wearing their brand new apron that they got for Christmas under the tree. And quite a few of you had them embroidered with your own name here at the top. Fantastic. I want to thank you to no end for helping us out. So, the first Old Cookbook Show of 2025, we are going to do a recipe out of this battered and tattered cookbook. I'm so glad that this showed up. One of you, our viewers, sent this to me in one of the boxes. It's a book that I'd been looking for, and it just sort of showed up, and I'm very happy. It's called The Home Cookbook. Signed by one of the previous owners, which is fantastic. So, tried, tested, and proved The Home Cookbook. Compiled from recipes contributed by ladies of Chicago and other cities and towns, originally published for the benefit of the Home for the Friendless Chicago. This is 1877. This one is published and printed. Previously printed 1874, 1875, 1875, 1877. So there's been several editions before this one, and it was a fundraiser. Or at least it started out as a fundraiser. By the time this one was published, it was no longer, the money was no longer being given to the Home of the Friendless. We're going to do a recipe called raised biscuits. Now I'll get to the recipe, because I want to talk about this cookbook. This is called The Home Cookbook, published in 1877. Tried, tested, and proven. The Home Cookbook, compiled by the ladies of Toronto and the chief cities and towns in Canada. 17th edition, published in 1877. Some of you may see the similarities. Okay, so let's get going with the recipe and we'll talk about it as we go along. We're going to do these raised biscuits. Originally, I wanted to do them because they were raised biscuits, and then I realized they were from Hannah Johnson. But once I saw that they were endorsed by Mrs. A.N. Shepherd, I was sold. So we're going to start out. The description's fairly vague, so we're going to be playing with this and figuring it out as we go along. I've got some milk here that I've warmed just to under body temperature. To that, I'm going to add sugar, yeast, and melted lard. And we'll just give that a bit of a stir to mix it up. Recipe calls for compressed yeast, or a cake of compressed yeast, which would have dissolved more easily into the milk. I find that the dry yeast that you get today doesn't dissolve in milk very well. Okay, so I've got that stirred together. I'm only making half the recipe because I don't need 8 cups of flour for worth of biscuits. So I've got 4 cups of flour here. I'm going to put into this mixing jug. So this cookbook comes out the Toronto cookbook comes out as a fundraiser for the Hospital for Sick Kids here in Toronto. Had just sort of opened. This is realized as the ladies in Toronto realize that this is a great fundraiser, so they do this. This is the first Canadian fundraising cookbook published, and starts a whole mess of fundraising cookbooks. But the ladies in Toronto copy, borrow. You can see it on every page. It's called The Home Cookbook, and at the top of every page it says also valuable recipes. Same thing in the Chicago cookbook. The recipes are completely different. These recipes in the Toronto cookbook are from Canadian cooks. It reflects the Canadian experience. This American cookbook has a whole section on biscuits, probably 10 or 15 different biscuit recipes. There are like 2 or 3 biscuit recipes in here because biscuits aren't a thing in Canada, or not as big a thing in Canada. So the ladies in Toronto think they're doing a great thing. People in Chicago, however, they don't think it's such a great thing. So they fire off a charge of piracy. I would too. I would too. This is too close. This really is too close. Even though all the recipes are different, a lot of this stuff is too close. They could have come up with something, you know, a little bit different. So the recipe says to put a hole in the flour and then put in all of the ingredients. So let's pour in the milk, everything in there. And then I'm just going to bring this together. Get some of the flour mixed in with the milk mixture. The recipe does not say whether to mix at all at this point. So I'm just going to mix part of the flour into the milk. And you'll see around the edge here, I've probably only mixed in about half. And I'm going to leave this and let it rise. So that sponge in the middle is going to rise up over the next couple of hours. It says to leave it overnight. And I suppose if you were in a drafty room, that would work really well. I'm in a heated environment. It says here, if made with compressed yeast, 6.5 hours will be sufficient to raise them in winter. It is winter here, but, you know, over the next probably 4 hours, it will rise enough. So anyway, the Chicago people fire off this charge of piracy. The Canadian ladies, you know Canadians, we're nice, we're kind, we're polite, sort of soft-spoken, go along, you know, sort of laid back. The Canadian ladies craft a letter, send it to the people in Chicago, and the people in Chicago hold up their hands and say, ah, yeah, whatever. Okay, go right ahead. We won't bother you anymore. I don't know what the letter said. I turned to this book called Culinary Landmarks by Elizabeth Dry. It's a bibliography of Canadian cookbooks from 1825 to 1949. Fantastic resource of almost every cookbook printed in Canada during that time. Not every cookbook. There's some holes. There's only so much one person can do, and I'm amazed at what is in here. Anyway, the Chicago people go away, and the Canadian ladies are allowed to continue. And this was a wildly successful book. I mean, in the first year, they had already gone to 20 publications, 17th edition. So by the time this was published, they'd already gone to 17. This book goes on to be published in Australia, New Zealand, England, into the 1950s. But around the time that this whole kerfuffle happens in Chicago, the Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto says, you know what? We don't want your money. So it's no longer a fundraiser at that point. It eventually is a failed fundraiser. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this on the back counter someplace warm, and I'll come back to it in a couple hours. Okay, so it looks like we've got a pretty good sponge happening. Let's see. Oh, there we go. That's a pretty good looking sponge. Now, the direction is to mix it all together. So the rest of the flour that's already in there, mix it into the sponge. Just pull it off of the sides and into the sponge. So I did not leave it overnight. The direction was to leave it overnight, but it also goes on to say that if you use the right yeast, 6 hours is sufficient to make it happen. Leaving it overnight would really build some flavor. That fermentation, that long fermentation in a cool place would really add some flavor. Now, I was wondering about the amount of flour. I was wondering if maybe I would need to add some flour at this point. I'm going to say I don't. It's actually kind of a little bit dry. If I was making bread, I would say that the hydration was wrong and it was too dry. I don't know about this particular mixture, though. Okay, so I got in here and mixed with my hands. It's come together kind of nicely. It is rather dry. I don't know exactly what it's supposed to be like. 1877, never eaten or made this before. I'm supposed to cover it over and let it rise again. This is one of the biggest problems with doing these old recipes. Looking at these older recipes and trying to recreate them. And I get people all the time in the comment section saying that I'm not doing it right. Maybe, maybe not. One of the things that I do know for a fact, though, is that nothing that recipe calls for in 1877 is the same as what we can get today in 2025. The flour is different. The yeast is different, different yeast strains. Milk, probably the same, although could have been higher fat in that time period. But definitely the biggest one and the biggest ingredient here is the flour. Completely different today than in 1877. So I'm going to let that rise. Probably a couple of hours with the temperature in the studio today, and we'll come back and see what happens. Okay, I've got a pretty good rise going on here in the container. Pretty much right up to the lid. Smells like a yeasted dough. Looks like a yeasted dough. Next up is roll it out or pat it out into the thickness of a biscuit, depending on what you think the thickness of a biscuit is. So, dough out onto a floured surface. So this is one of those scenarios where if you're rolling it out and you can't get it thin enough and it keeps snapping back or shrinking back, just take a linen tea towel, damp it a little bit so that it's not completely dry, but not soaking wet. You kind of know what I mean. And lay it over top and just let it rest. Walk away. Do something else for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and then come back and roll it again. I think I've got this biscuit thickness at this point. So get my biscuit cutter, and I'm supposed to cut them. What does it say? Cut them like biscuits. Then brush one side with butter. Wet one edge with melted butter. Okay. And then fold together like rolls. I guess like is it a Parker House roll that's folded this way? I often see things like this and they'd be put inside a muffin tin and allowed to rise. I'm supposed to put them onto a baking sheet and let them rise. So I'm just going to go ahead, cut the rest of these out, fold them over, put them onto the baking sheet, and then let them rise 20 minutes. Nope. My timing is when well risen, so there's actually no timing. I can just go by eye. Last one, and I'll get a towel, and I'll just put the towel over top. I'm going to say 20 minutes max, and these will have risen enough to put them into the oven. I'd say those have risen. Into the oven they go. About 20 minutes. Let's see what happens. They all opened up a little bit. They look like little couches.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey, Jules.
Hey, friends. I don't know who to be here. What did you make today?
Biscuits. Well, yes.
Biscuits?
Raised biscuits. Careful, this is hot.
Still hot.
Yeah.
They're kind of oddly shaped biscuits.
So you cut them out, put a little bit of butter, and then you fold them over. And I pinched them to try to hold them together, but they still came apart. Anyway,
So there's a dabble of butter in there somewhere?
yeah, it's kind of wild because there's nothing about this that says modern biscuit to me. Oh, that's that. The cooktop does not like having something metal sit on it.
They're trying to figure out what the beeping is. There we go. Done.
It's a yeasted bun. It really is a yeasted bun. Butter, jam.
It's going to need more butter.
Yeah.
I don't really taste the dollop of butter.
So I don't know if I mentioned it, but when I did the first, no, I made the sponge, let it rise, then mixed in the rest of the flour, and I said, it seems a little dry. I did put in 2 more tablespoons of milk. Don't be afraid to do that. And I mixed that in and then let it rise, and I got a much better consistency because it was too dry. And that comes down to nothing is the same in 2025 as it was in 1870, whatever.
I'm tempted to eat more though because I do like it's so nice and warm. It's,
Warm.
it's got that warm
bread.
bread joy
Yeah.
thing going there. Add some cheese. Good.
I think they're pretty good. Maybe that sponge step, really do leave it overnight and let the sponge develop a little bit more flavor. A little bit of salt would be good in this because it doesn't have any salt. Salt would balance out the flavor a little bit. Overall, pretty good. But that recipe for raised biscuits is not in the pirate book. It's not in the pirate book.
So if you've got the pirate book, you'll have to come back and look for the recipe
Yeah.
down below.
Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon. Hey, you're still here. So, the standalone unpackaging of cookbooks. Those videos didn't work out very well. Didn't get a lot of views. And when I did a video back a while back talking about that, a few people suggested, well, why not just do them as an add-on after the regular Sunday morning show? So we're going to give that a try for a little while. And today I'm going to unpackage these 2 packages. This first one is from the United States. And let's see what's in here. There's a note. Thank you very much. And so this is from the Wesson Oil Company. That's the back cover. And the front cover just says recipes, compliments of Batten Brothers. Okay, so when I opened up the book, this letter fell out. I'm going to open it carefully because it is sort of coming apart a little bit. New York City, August 18th, 1915. Dear Madame, Batten Brothers asked us to send you this Wesson Oil recipe book by Mrs. Rohrer. You know Mrs. Rohrer's reputation as a cook. I do. Mrs. Rohrer was a prolific recipe and cookbook writer. She worked for all of the big corporations in their test kitchens, laying the groundwork for a lot of recipes that you probably still make today. And you might not make them exactly the way Mrs. Rohrer envisioned them or the way that she wrote them out the first time. Products have changed, times have changed. But you can see in some recipes today how they got their starting point with Mrs. Rohrer. And so this is Wesson Oil, but it's made by the Southern Cotton Oil Company. So it's still cottonseed oil. They call it a vegetable oil. A little bit of baggage around calling it cottonseed oil. So the letter's dated 1915. So they sent this book out in 1915, but the book itself was printed in 1913. In typical fashion for these books, some of the recipes are just existing recipes where they've shoehorned in the oil. And other ones they look like they were fairly new recipes in the time period. This is a great book. I don't have this one yet. And this one is made all that more special by having this letter. Order a 25-cent can of Wesson oil today. 25 cents. I wonder how much oil is in that 25-cent can. Looks like quite a bit. Okay, thank you very much for sending this in to me. I'm going to have a great time looking through it. This is a fantastic find. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so let's move on to this next one. This next one came from the UK, somewhere in the UK. There is a letter. Greetings from sunny Cornwall, UK. Please make the Garibaldi biscuits or the Bathabers cake? Let's take a look. What have we got? Whitworth's Spice of Life Cookery Book. 3 shillings. So obviously published before England changed their money. I never understood shillings. So this is the 3rd edition, and just, you know, kind of on first blush, I'd say this is 1940s, late 1940s maybe. There's no date immediately at the front. I don't see the date anywhere in here. Well loved, well used, which is great to see. I love to see cookbooks that have been used. So Whitworth's produced flour, self-raising or plain. A whole bunch of other products: almonds, marzipan, peel, sugar, cereal. Oh, it's packaged. It's packaged in a Whitworth's contemporary. I would say this is contemporary 2024, 2025 Whitworth's granulated sugar bag. Just put that together now. So Whitworth's makes a whole bunch of things for the kitchen, apparently in the UK. So let's find Garibaldi biscuits. It says here page 74. So let's get to page 74. On page 73, there's a recipe for cookies. Okay. Garibaldi biscuits. Currants or Eccles cake filling, butter or margarine, self-raising flour, salt, castor sugar, milk, white of an egg, and then castor sugar, I guess, to put on top. Okay, so at some point in the future, we'll be doing a recipe out of one of these 2 books. Keep your eye out for that. Thank you to everyone who sends in these books. I really love getting them. I don't know how this is going to work out at the end of the other videos. I want to keep them kind of short and tight. I don't want to go on too long and make the videos too long. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.